welcome back to the channel. Right then, Gambling Low Ebbs Part 5. I'm going to try and get this one done. It's the penultimate entry in the series. There's going to be one more after this one. And I've got to be completely honest with you, Gambling Low Ebbs Part 4, whilst I feel a legitimate entry in the series, was kind of a diversion tactic. Because I've been putting this one off. I've really been putting this one off because it's a fucking horrible one. I cannot promise you that this one is not going to get messy. And if you get to the end of this one and just think, you know what, Degsy, you're just an irredeemably horrible cunt, I would not blame you. So let me just show you, before I get started, the actual timelines on this one. I've done some high-tech graphics here. There are the various periods in time that each of the Ebbs videos correspond to, because they're not in chronological order. So there's been 4 of them up to now. So you can see there that chronologically Part 4 was actually the earliest. We've got Part 1 there, which I can't put an exact date on, but I'm pitching at February, March or April of 94. Now, this one here, this is the one of interest here, because Part 3, by the way, I know exactly, and Part 4, I know exactly. But Part 2, I pitched, I did go back and check the video, I pitched that as July, August 94. I am thinking that possibly wants to go a little bit earlier, into June 1994, because I know that this one, the one that I'm doing now, is August of 1994. Not that it really matters, but I do like to get the chronology correct. I do want to know that my numbers are right. So Ebbs 6, of course, is still to come. So that's your mystery box. We'll get to that one in due course. So I am pretty confident that I can put this at August 94, and the ripple effects of it went through to, well, certainly to December 1994, and honestly beyond that as well. And one thing that I do want to say before I get started on this is that these videos are being made with the full knowledge and consent and indeed support of Mrs. Degsy. Mrs. Degsy has watched all of the previous Gambling Low Ebbs videos, because I think it was Part 3 where I thought, you know what, this is starting to involve you now, so I need to talk to you about it. And she is actually, like I said, not to say, oh, well, you know, if you really want to, she is being supportive of me. And some of the things that I will be talking about in this video relate to her as well. And we've been together for an awfully long time now. We've been together since 1994. So we've worked a lot of shit out between each other. Both of us have had our problems and our issues over the years, and we're lucky enough to both still be standing and in a place where we can have a conversation about these things. So I want to state for the record, I would not even remotely be making this video were it not for the fact that Mrs. Degsy not only knows about it and has consented to it, but is also supportive of me, because, as I will get into, we've both had our demons to combat over the years, and kind of getting to the point where, you know what, it's okay to talk about this stuff, because I think there's, particularly when you get to addictions and illnesses, mental illnesses in particular, if you've got a broken fucking arm, it's, oh, how's your arm, man, that must fucking hurt. But once you get into these more sort of brain focused things, it's what they call an invisible illness. So Mrs. Degsy is right behind me on actually getting these things done, and were it not for her, like I say, consent and indeed support, I wouldn't be doing this one at all. So with that said, we are going to go back to August 1994. And me and Mrs. Degsy had been going out for a few months at that point. We started going out in May of 1994, which also, if you've watched the previous videos, you will know corresponds with what I would say is absolutely the utter low point of my addiction, as per, I'll just drag this fantastic graphic back in. That there, which I identified in Part 4 as being when my addiction went full bore, the back end of 1992 when I went away to university. 1993 was a miserable fucking year. And then into 1994, And in May of 1994, me and Mrs. Degsy actually started going out together. And that may seem slightly strange in the context of, like, if you've got this grinding, horrible addiction, how do you start a new relationship? And I was thinking about this as I was putting this video together. It's like, addicts are people too. You know, you can have an addiction, but you're still a human being. You know, cut us and our blood will be red. You still have feelings, you still have emotions, you still feel happy, you still feel sad, you still desire human contact, you still desire relationships, but you've got this fucking crushing addiction weighing down upon you the whole time. But it doesn't preclude the fact that you still want to live like a human being. So it happened so that in May of 94, me and Mrs. Degsy started going out with each other. And the way that came about is the last that I was going out with before Mrs. Degsy had dumped me. In, I think it was April of 94, she finally dumped me. It was a bit of a tempestuous relationship. And to be honest with you, I was not a great boyfriend. We both had our issues, but not least the fact that I was addicted to fruit machines. It was kind of all... I don't want to go into the details because it's not for me to speak on her behalf 27 years down the line. It was a troubled relationship. We were together for a reasonable period of time, about a year or so, but it finally came to pass that she dumped me. And she dumped me in the, I think it was called the Shakespeare. I will try and retrospectively find this when I do the edit. I think it was a pub called the Shakespeare. It was certainly in the centre of Manchester, not far away from Piccadilly Gardens. And she'd arranged to meet up with me. We went to this pub together, and here's the thing: we went to the bar, got a couple of drinks, got a drink each. She went to sit down, and then I went to play the fruit machine. And it was, I remember the machine it was a Happy Days by Project, which was like a clone of Bullseye. And I stood there like a fucking arsehole for 20 minutes or so, playing the fruit machine, lost my money, then went down to sit with my girlfriend, who proceeded to dump me. And one of the things that she cited was, "You're always playing those fucking fruit machines." And I still tried to blag my way out of it. I was like, no, not really, it's not that bad. And she's like, "You've been fucking stood there for 20 minutes playing the thing." It's like, that's the kind of level it was at, that my girlfriend, who was about to dump me, sat there and waited for 20 minutes whilst I played the fruit machine, citing the fact that I'm always playing the fruit machines as a reason to dump me. And I'm still kind of like trying to, like say, blag or deny my way out of it, but it didn't happen. The dumping was complete. I remember walking out into the city street in Manchester, and very, very sort of cinematic. It was raining at the time, and I stood there with the rain coming down on my head and think, this is fucking shit. Everything's fucking horrible. But in the sort of days and weeks that followed, I was meeting up with my friend. This is the main guy who was in Gambling Low Ebbs Part 4, the guys that I was sort of down with clubbing and partying with in Manchester when I was going down from Lancaster University. And we were going out for beers. We were still seeing each other on a regular basis, in early 1994. And I was very, very mopey about the fact that I'd been dumped. And I was always also talking about the fact that I really liked Mrs. Degsy, and I fancied Mrs. Degsy because Mrs. Degsy and my previous girlfriend lived in the same halls of residence. So there was kind of like, we kind of been seeing each other, and we knew each other, and we'd been going to the same clubs and all that kind of thing. And he was like, "Will you just fucking ring her up and ask her out? Because I'm getting fucking pissed off with this. You're moping around. You're kind of saying how sad you are about this, that, and the other. And, maybe you should give this lass a call. Just give her a call. Give her a ring." So I did. I remember it was the pub. It was one of the pubs that the fucking IRA blew up in the Manchester bombings. It was a pub that was in the side of the Arndale Centre. I'll find a picture of it and put it in the side there. I remember we were sat in that pub, and he was saying, just ring her up and ask her out. It was like obviously 1994, before mobile phones, so it was a payphone. Went to the side of the bar, put me 10p in the fucking phone, rang the future Mrs. Degsy up and asked if she'd like to meet up and go for a drink? And she was a little bit non-committal, which is like, yeah, okay, well, maybe it might be all right. And from there, the relationship started. We did indeed meet up, and we started to get together, and a relationship started to form. We enjoyed each other's company, and we became a couple, albeit with our own things going on. Now, from my side, of course, it's obvious I was a fruit machine addict. I had a serious addiction issue. From Mrs. Degsy's side, she was suffering from clinical depression. At that point, undiagnosed, and we have talked about this fairly recently, in fact. You know, once you get to our age, and we're both now in our late 40s, and we've been going back over our lives and talking about things together. And we've kind of said that we both really liked each other, but we saw something in each other that was hurting. We saw something that was in pain. And there was an element, yes, I guess, if you were absolutely honest, there was a little bit of us hanging on to each other, but also seeing something in each other that we loved. And we, like I say, our sort of romance blossomed. We started spending a lot of time together. We started going out to the pub together. And it was not perfect, that there were issues there, not least because I was a fruit machine addict, and Mrs. Degsy was displaying, you know, many of the characteristics of clinical depression, you know, which is attachment and then pushing people away and all that kind of thing. But it was good. We enjoyed spending time together, and we did so, and things were sort of progressing as you would expect in a relationship. And I do remember the first, you know, inverted commas, proper night that we spent together down at our Halsell residence in Manchester. And in the morning, we got up at student o'clock. We were listening to a cassette of Park Life by Blur, which is a really one of those albums, you know what it's like with songs and albums that are burned into your brain because they just connect with certain moments in your history. It's, for me, Park Life by Blur is one of those albums, because me and Mrs. Degsy used to lie in bed listening to that album, you know, many times. Before, you know, there's no fucking Spotify or all the music in the world on your phone back then. It was like a little fucking crappy cassette player on the sort of window ledge. And in the morning, we got up at, like I say, student o'clock, so about 10, half 10, something like that. And I said to Mrs. Deggs, I'll go through to the kitchen and make you something for you, make you something to eat, sort of thing. So, okay. So she came through with me, went through to the kitchen, and it was a Halsell residence. So each of the students had like their own cupboard and their own little bit in the fridge. And she showed me her cupboard, and that's my cupboard and that's my bit in the fridge. And I said, you know what, go back to your room. I'll make you something to eat, and I'll come back in like 15 minutes or so. Went into her cupboard, and there was like nothing in there. There was like some Weetabix. There was a bit of pasta, like a half a bag of pasta. There was like a fucking can of tuna, and not much else. And I'm looking at it, and then I looked in a bit in the fridge, and there was nothing in there. So I'm like, what am I going to do with this here? And there was a little bit of robbing of, nearby. I had to do there was a little bit of thievery involved to put a dish together. But I came up with, it was like I stole some tomato puree, stole a bit of mixed herbs, commandeered a pan, and put together a fairly unimaginative, the best I could do in the circumstances, which was like a tomatoey tuna. I've got some frozen peas. I don't think they were her frozen peas. Some herbs in there, a little bit of salt and pepper. And it was like a tomato tuna peas on pasta dish. Nothing incredible. But it was like, it was a meal. I think the kindest thing you could say about it was at least a meal. Took it back to her room, said, there you go. I'm sorry, it's the best I can do. There's not much in there to work with. And she took this kind of bowl of this creation of me and absolutely wolfed it down, like the whole, like proper. And I said to her, what are you eating? And she's like, not pizzas and takeaways mainly. And I'm like, you know what? Right. I know this is not a particularly exciting date, but me and you need to go shopping and we'll get some stuff in for you. And that was kind of what we were doing, you know. It was like, it's hard to put into words. It's not what you would necessarily describe as being your standard kind of romance, but one of those. And I still remember this day very clearly. We got the bus up into Manchester and we went to a little supermarket that was in the centre there, and was buying a few sort of supplies and essentials in for her. And I remember thinking how happy I was with her, how, even though it was tricky, right? Okay, there was one thing, because I was working at the time, because it was the summer holidays and I was working. And when I was working, obviously I was back up in Radcliffe and Bury way, and Mrs. Degsy would go out clubbing with the people from her halls, and then she'd ring me up at like 3 a.m, and like when I had work the next day. And it got to the point, because we only had like one phone in the house, an old fucking bring, 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 you know, phone on a fucking wire thing. And she'd ring up at like 3 a.m. when she got back from clubbing. And my brother got really pissed off, because it was me, my dad and my brother all living in the same house. And my brother was like, one day was like, you've got to tell your new girlfriend to stop ringing up, because she's fucking waking me up in the middle of the night all the time. And then she'd ring me up at like 3 a.m, and we'd be chatting to each other. Oh yeah, what have you been? What have you been doing? Yeah, what have you been getting? Blah, blah, blah. And then I'd say to her, okay, can I come around and see you like tomorrow and day after? She said, oh, well, I don't know. I'm kind of. And what she was doing, of course, was just preemptively pushing me away, because she was kind of thinking, I don't really believe anyone's interested in me. And from my side, I thought I was punching above my weight. So it was a weird dynamic. But I was kind of thinking to myself, she must be interested, because she's ringing me up at 3 a.m. She'll chat to me for an hour at 3 a.m. And I didn't understand it, of course. What I know now is that she was suffering from clinical depression, which has since been diagnosed and treated with therapy and counselling and all the rest of it. And I had my own issues, but we saw something in each other that we felt was worth persevering with, I guess is the best way to put it. So yeah, from there, like I say, we just went up into the centre of Manchester together shopping. I still remember it super clearly, just walking around this supermarket with her and thinking, I feel so comfortable with you, I feel so happy with you. And it kind of like, it pushed the addiction out for a little bit. And it was to actually have that degree of feeling really happy to be in someone's presence. But that was in May of 1994. And then, of course, not long after that, the summer holidays came around. So by the time that Mrs. Degsy came back to the Isle of Man, because that's where she lived, I still lived up at North Manchester in Radcliffe with my dad. Mrs. Degsy lived on the Isle of Man with her mum and dad. So she went away for the summer holidays, and we were phoning each other up. We were writing each other letters. I have still got all the letters that Mrs. Degsy sent me in those early stages of our relationship. And we were in regular contact with each other. One of the things that I did towards I think we may have even seen each other a couple of times. I think she came over to stay with me. And I also went to, certainly for absolute facts, in August of 1994, I went to stay over with Mrs. Degsy. And the way, I think I mentioned this before, that her mum and dad owned a business in Ramsey. It was a shoe shop in Ramsey. They owned the whole building, and above that was kind of what they called the flat, even though it was basically a house, because it was still it was like a 3-story building, I guess 4 if you count the cellar. So there was a flat above that, which was like a 2-story house. And I came over in August of 1994 to the Isle of Man to stay with Mrs. Degsy. And we had this place to ourselves, because Mrs. Degsy's mum and dad, they had a house out on the outskirts of town. So this like I say, this building, even though it had what would be like a rentable property above it, they never wanted to do that, and the properties weren't separated in terms of electricity supply and heating and that kind of thing. So the place had essentially been sat empty, fully furnished, like ready to move in sort of thing. So we were able to stay there, and I think I was over from the benefit, I'm thinking like a week. I think I was over for a week. And I will pitch this as August 1994. and spent a week on the Isle of Man with her. And it went well. We had a really good time together. We went out on the electric tram. We went out to, remember us going out to Laxey and spending a load of time together and generally having a good time. But I was skint, and also I was like the small amount of money that I came over with, I lost in the fruit machines, and I was very much in the denial stage. This is something that you might be aware of. You can do if you play fruit machines, that you're just pretending that you're playing them for fun and that there's no real cash involved. And then when you lose your money, you fucking bullshit that you've, I don't know, lost your wallet or you thought you had some more cash or that kind of thing. I was kind of getting away with it. And it was the strangest time as well, because on the one hand, I am super happy, like my soul has been lifted by spending time with my new girlfriend. We've only been going out like 3 or 4 months. But on the other hand, the addiction, which was absolutely at its worst through 1993 and into 94, was absolutely at its worst. And there was one thing that I had that was going to happen not long after, because the plan was I'd gone over to the Isle of Man to see Mrs. Degsy. And then the day that I left the Isle of Man, I wasn't going to go back to my dad's place in Manchester. I was going to go down to Chelmsford, where my mum lived with her. My mum and dad separated when I was 4 years old, and they went their separate ways. My mum at this time was living down in Chelmsford. She had got remarried, and she had 2 children, and I was going to go down there to visit my mum and see her. She had a new husband down there as well, and she had 2 children, and I was going to go down there because they had an au pair, which I know sounds super, super posh, but it really, really wasn't. They were both working full-time, and they had an au pair, but the au pair wasn't going to be turning up for a day, so the deal was I was going to go down to Chelmsford, and I would, it was half visit and half filling in a gap in the family where the au pair wasn't going to be there. My mum and her husband were going to be at work, and I was going to be there to sort of babysit the children. So it's kind of 2 things rolled into one, a visit and a little bit of a job, if you will. So it's coming up to the end of my visit on the Isle of Man, and I know that I'm going down to Chelmsford the next day. Tickets are already sorted, that's done. And the thing that I'm kind of perhaps not getting over here is how utterly consuming my addiction was at that point. It's kind of hard to reconcile the 2 things, I know, but what I was aware of was that I had no fucking money. I think Mrs. Degsy was kind of carrying me whilst I was here, and she was kind of paying for things, because whatever money I'd had gone. By this time, by the way, you know the stuff that I was talking about in Gambling Low Ebbs Part 4? You know, like the whole catalogue thing, the catalogue scam when I was at uni and all that? That fell apart spectacularly in 1993 when all these debts were coming in to be collected. I couldn't pay them. My credit rating, this was the early days, I think, of credit ratings. My credit rating was utterly fucking trashed. I couldn't borrow a fucking bean off a bank anywhere in the United Kingdom. And I had no money. I had nothing in my whatever fucking student bank accounts I had at the time. And I was aware that I was going down to Chelmsford, and I had absolutely fuck all. And one of the things that I'd also planned to do was meet up with one of my old school friends who was down there. Hadn't seen him for, God, it must have been 3 or 4 years at that point, but we'd been talking on the phone. I think we'd even written letters to each other. And I was going to be meeting this friend of mine, an old friend of mine from school, down in Chelmsford. The plan was to go out on the beers, but I had no fucking money. Now, I realise this might be a little bit of a jump, but somehow, and this is the thing that I want to try and get over here, it's if you have been addicted, if you have ever had an addiction, and it doesn't have to be to fruit machines, it can be to anything, this will possibly make sense. And I think if you haven't, it's maybe words that you can listen to, but still just not really reconcile into any kind of anything that makes sense. But as it came towards the end of my sort of week on the Isle of Man, I became consumed with the idea that I would have to have money to go down to Chelmsford with, to meet my friend and to kind of do stuff. And somehow, and I still to this day cannot fully explain it, towards the last 2 or 3 days of my visit, I got into my head the idea that the way that I could get money to go down and meet with my friends, the plan was we were going to go out to go to the pub for the day, on the day where I wasn't doing the sort of child sitting, babysitting duty. I needed money for that, and I had to get money for that, and I was absolutely tapped out. If you remember what I was talking about in Gambling Low Ebbs Part 4, where that was kind of through 92, back end of 92 and 93, just exhausting everything. There was nothing left. By 94, it was kind of like my dad was really fucking fed up with me by now. No banks would fucking even give me the time of day. So I was skint. I was absolutely fucking skint. And yet I had this plan to go down and meet up with my old friend from school. And we're going to go out on the beers. And I don't know quite how this happened. I'm not saying I'm explaining it. I'm not saying I'm justifying it. But somehow I got into my head the idea that Mrs. Degsy's cash card would give me the money to do this. And we'd done that whole thing, you know, where she would go to the cash point and it's like, oh, it's my new boyfriend. Yeah, you can see my pin. It's kind of a cute thing. Yeah, you know, don't let anyone else see your pin. And she was showing me her pin because it was like, yeah, it's my boyfriend. It's cool. This is fine. And in my head, the last couple of days of my visit to the Isle of Man, the cash card started to represent money. And specifically, the cash card started to represent money that I could gamble with. And it's a fever. It's like insects crawling all over your skin. I mean, describing it now as someone who has kind of beaten that addiction, but I can still remember it as an all-consuming fever. It sounds fucking stupid if you try and explain it to sort of a casual bystander what an addiction can do to you. It is a sickness that rots your soul. It is a corrosion that will destroy any sense of morality, any sense of right or wrong that you have. It will burn through everything and lead you to do unconscionable things that, were the addiction removed from your character, you would not even think about for a single second. And yet, somehow, I was fixated on the idea that I need to get money. I need to get money for when I go down to Chelmsford. I need to be able to go to the pub. And most significantly of all, I need to be able to gamble. And it seems insane now to even describe it, because it was premeditated. It wasn't even spur of the moment. It wasn't even just a fucking like oh, I'll just do this crazy thing without even thinking about it. And in the sort of day before I was due to go to Chelmsford, completely ignoring what was in front of me, which was Mrs. Degsy, and we've been together for 27 years now, I took her cash card and I hid it. I hid it in a fucking, they had like a clock, one of the old carriage clocks, I think, not a carriage clock, I'll find the right thing, but like a clock, an old fashioned mechanical wind up clock. And I took her cash card and hid it in this clock. And I timed it as well so that there would be no opportunity to pursue it whilst I was still there. It was like, have you seen my cash card? No, I don't know. Oh, I'm going back today, kind of thing. And when the opportunity then presented itself, I took the card from where I'd hidden it, put it into my luggage, and then she saw me away. I got the boat back to the UK and then did the usual train things to get down to Chelmsford with my girlfriend's cash card on me that she thought she had lost, but I had actually taken. And I had deliberately done in such a way that it would kind of be like too late to do anything about it. Got down to Chelmsford to my mum's house, and showed me. And I knew the house already. Off to my room. And then the next day, I had a day where I was able to go out on the beer. That was the day that I planned with my old friend from school. And then the day after that was my looking after the children day and doing something useful. So got down to Chelmsford, went into the room, spent the night, got up in the morning, and I'd called the guy up, and we'd arranged, we were going to meet early doors. And we got into the first pub we'd picked a pub that opened at 11 in the morning. And it turned out that this guy had kind of got, I don't want to say off the rails, but he got into all, he was a fucking booze hound and other stuff as well. And we were both absolutely fucking up for it. We actually got on really well. We were chatting right from the start, and it was kind of good in that regard. And I had a little bit of money. I think my mum had given me 20 quid to go out with. So I think my mum had given me a bit of money to go out with. So I think I had 20 quid. I think she'd given me 20 quid. And I also had Mrs. Degsy's cash card on me. And I knew the PIN. And we went to this first pub. There's a bit of me thinking, you know what, Degsy? You've got 20 quid here. You could probably, at a push, do this day out on 20 quid. But we got a beer in this first pub, and I was just playing the fruit machine. I think I kind of managed to not skin myself and not lose everything. So we managed to get as far as the second pub, get a second drink in, and then I lost what everything that I had on me. I had no cash. There was not a penny on me. The only source of money I had at this point was Mrs. Degsy's cash card, who was back on the Isle of Man thinking that she had lost it, when in actual fact her boyfriend was down in Chelmsford with it on him. And so I said, you know what, I need to go to let's get another beer, I need to go to the fucking cash point. And I remember this really clearly. Stood in front of this cash point on Chelmsford High Street. I'll try and find an approximation of where it was. And the bit of me that was still not this horrible, fucking, despicable addict was screaming into my ear, you don't have to do this. You can fucking stop now. Okay? You can ring her up. You can say, it'd still be bullshit. It'd still be fucking bullshit. It'd still be a fucking lie. But you could say, oh, God, you're not going to believe this. I've got your cash card. I'm really sorry. I've got all the way here. I've got your cash card. I know you thought you've lost it. But you know what I mean? It was salvageable. There was a world where I could have ended up with my girlfriend's cash card down in Chelmsford. Make a phone call. Oh, shit, I'm really sorry. Stupid me. I'll post it back to you, or just tell the bank you've lost it and they'll give you a new one. And I'm stood in front of this cash point thinking, and it was still early. This was the thing. I think it was about midday, 12, half 12, something like that. And the plan is that me and this mate of mine are going to go out and have a fucking day of beers, a day out together. And I'm stood in front of this cash point, and the bit of my conscience that was still kind of grounded was screaming at me, don't fucking do this. Don't fucking do this. Don't fucking do this. And the card goes into the cash point. PIN. Doop, 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 doop. Cash. no receipt, £100. And in that moment, I stole money from my girlfriend so that I go to the pub and play fucking fruit machines. And also in that moment, the brakes went off. Once I had crossed that line, that was the thing. I knew I was crossing a line. I knew that in that moment, I was risking setting everything on fire. I knew that what I was doing was astoundingly stupid and was going to blow everything up. And yet, for the sake of some money, to play fruit machines, to go to the pub and play fruit machines, I did it anyway. And once that was done, that was that. And it turned out that this mate of mine that I'd kind of, like I say, we kind of just recently got back in touch. He'd gone full bore as well. He was absolutely fucking up for a bender of biblical proportions. And once I'd taken that first £100 out, this is the thing, Mrs. Degsy had a pretty high for the time. She had like a daily withdrawal limit of like 250 quid, which her mum and dad had kind of deliberately given her because they had like a business account and her account was an offshoot of that. And a lot of accounts at the time were capped at like 100 quid a day or something like that. She had a cap of like £250. I think it was that. Like I say, me and this guy, we fucking went at it. I think it is the most I have ever drunk in a single day. And once I did that, once that money was in my pocket, once that first £100 was in my pocket, it was like it was burning a fucking hole right through the core of my being. It was destroying what remained of my decency from the inside because I knew what it represented. I knew it was a betrayal. I knew that this was I knew that I was doing damage here, huge damage to someone who I really loved. And I couldn't reconcile that in my brain because it made no sense. There was no element of what I was doing that was anything other than insane. And I knew that what I was doing was feeding an addiction. So that was it. We just fucking went at it. We stopped at about, from memory, we actually paused at about 4:30, 5 in the afternoon, bearing in mind that we started drinking at 11 o'clock and we just absolutely, like I said, we went at it like a couple of people possessed. We had to pause briefly to get like a cheeseburger and chips at McDonald's, otherwise we'd have just fucking collapsed, and then just carried on. And we went all the way through, right to last orders. We went round God knows how many pubs. And I was just, once I'd done it, once that line had been crossed, I was just fucking gambling non-stop. He kind of thought it was like fucking getting beers and gambling. Oh, you're fucking mad on these things. Yeah. You must be losing a bit of cash. Like, yeah, well, you know, whatever. Went back to the... I maxed out the card. I can't remember if it was 2 or 3 withdrawals or the fourth one, it fucking denied me, but I hit the limit, which I'm pretty sure was 250 quid. I hit the limit. It stopped giving me money. And, you know, we're going back to 1994 here, where that was a fucking serious... You cannot even... the gambling was so reckless. It was so off the rails. I didn't even care. It was just a blind fucking blunderbuss of drinking and gambling for essentially 12 hours. And the stupidest thing is, I can't actually remember any of the machines that I played. Normally, when I've got this kind of story, I can remember a machine. I can remember one, like a machine in a pub. I don't have it for this. There's just a black hole in my memory. I think it's because my fucking head to this day knows how horrible what it was I did. The only thing I can actually remember is we were down in a pub, I think it's across the river in Chelmsford, where they had a pinball. And this was the one fucking sort of respite in the whole fucking thing, where I remember feeling anything other than utter shit, was just playing this pinball. We played a pinball for maybe 15, 20 minutes. It was the WMS World Cup Soccer 94 table, which was a brand new table at the time. It was all shiny and new in this pub. We played that for a bit, and that was like the only, that for some reason that stuck in my head, playing this pinball. I can't remember any of the fruit machines, but of course that time in sort of August of 1994, it would have been the £6 jackpot. So we kept doing it right up until the last. We talked very openly about buying drugs. It's like, oh, do you know where to go so we can get some fucking gear, like? And neither of us did. I didn't know Chelmsford at that point. I'd only lived there for 3 years, a few years earlier. He'd moved away from the area. We had no idea where to go to buy any kind of drugs, so we just got utterly fucking hammered. And I remember the last pub that we went in, I had 2 pints of Guinness, and I never drink Guinness. I don't like Guinness at all. I had 2 pints of Guinness to finish off. The money had gone. The whole fucking lot had gone. I was down to me sort of last fucking few quid, if that. I think the last few pounds went in the fruit machine in there. We said goodbye, said, you know what, and I never saw him again after that day. Never met the guy again after that day. He went his way, I went my way. I was utterly fucking destroyed. I was so fucking drunk. But fucking drunk radar kicked in, made it back to my mum's house, went in. I fucking actually cracked my foot on something going in and dropped some blood on the sort of hallway going in. Found my way into my room and just went that horrible kind of pissed sleep that you have, and woke up the next morning. And the next morning was the day, of course, that was what I was there for, to do something fucking useful, because of the way that my mum and her new husband, their shifts worked. They both worked shifts. So there was this period of time where I needed to be there, where the au pair wasn't there, and kind of look after the children. And I was so hungover. It was I think to this day, it's the worst hungover I have ever been in my entire life. I remember we went shopping to Tesco in the morning. We went over the road to a Tesco's. We did some shopping with me mum before she had to go off to work. I remember vomiting outside Tesco, just chucking my fucking guts outside Tesco's. And then I had to look after my, technically he's my half-brother, for the day. And I took him to the library, and I was just wanting to chunder the whole time. And I had this constant nagging, horrible knowledge of what I had done the day before, because I knew there was a reckoning coming for this. I wasn't even remotely expecting to get away with it. I was just kind of self-destructive. It was this kind of, didn't even feel like I deserved to even be alive. So it was like, it was just blow everything up, don't give a fuck about anything and worry about it tomorrow. But it was hanging over me the whole day. Because I knew this, it was the world's worst crime. It's not like this was going to go undiscovered. And so going into the evening of the day after, I was in my mum's house. I think I was in there by myself with the 2 children. And I was sat in the front lounge, and I was watching The Simpsons on Sky. And it was like 7 o'clock at night. And this hangover was not giving up. This hangover was still going. It was still pounding. You know, when you can't go to, you're not tired enough to go to sleep, but you're just trying to pass the hours until you are. And I've got this absolute sense of dread about me that I've completely destroyed things with my new girlfriend. Like I say, we've been going out for 3 or 4 months. I've completely fallen for her. I think I'm doing pretty fucking well, to be honest with you. Like I say, punching above my weight, and yet I stole her cash card, stole her money, and just pumped the whole fucking lot into fucking fruit machines. And I'm sat there probably about 6:30, 7 in the evening, and the phone rang. The landline, there was only landlines at the time. And that was one of the slightly newer, like, digital BT phones of the time. I'll find a picture. It's got a very distinctive ring. If you were around, if you're as old as me, you'll remember the ring. Even though I wasn't in my house, I knew it was for me, and I knew it was it was about what I had done the day before. I didn't know exactly how, but I knew this was judgment calling. So the phone, and I looked at it like there's some kind of hot fucking coal that I daren't fucking touch, but picked the handset up and said, "Hello?" And it was my dad. And he goes, "Alex, what the bloody hell is this?" And I'm like, "What? I don't know what you're talking about. What do you mean?" And he goes, "You know exactly what I mean." And basically, here's what had happened. There was a delay. There was a lag of a day from Mrs. Degsy and her dad went down to the bank. So I got away with it for a day using this cash card down in Chelmsford, maxing it out, taking all the money that I could out of it. The day after that, Mrs. Degsy and her dad went down to the Isle of Man Bank in Ramsey to report her cash card lost. "Oh, hiya, yeah, I've lost my cash card. Can I get a replacement, please?" "Yeah, just take a seat," and blah, blah, blah. "Okay, come through, yeah. What's happened?" "Yeah, you've lost your cash card." "Okay." "Blah, blah, what's your name? What's your account number?" Da, 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 da. "Okay, and when did you lose it?" "Okay, 2 or 3 days ago." "Yeah, okay." Okay, this is strange. Your cash card's been used." Like, "What do you mean it's been used? I've lost it." No, we've got... let me just show you my screen. Can you see there? We've got several withdrawals down in Chelmsford. £250 has been taken out of it just yesterday. And you don't need to be fucking Sherlock Holmes to put that together. So can you So can you imagine Mrs. Degsy's fucking sat there with her dad in the bank, and they both know exactly what's happened. You know, it's like, fucking hell, he's stolen me fucking cash card, and he's taken £250 on it down in Chelmsford. And what had happened is, Mrs. Degsy's dad, because they owned a business, they had a fax machine. And that was kind of a thing in the 90s, before like internet and emails. The way that you sent like documents to one another was through a fax machine, which is, like I say, I think there's certain people who will not know because they don't exist anymore. What you would do, you would basically feed a fucking letter or, like I say, a bit of paper, a document, into a fax machine. There was like a really low bitrate modem in there, and it would like a little bit like a Spectrum game loading or something like that. That would then reconstruct the document on like a thermal printer at the other end. Fax to fax. It was a phone line to a phone line. And what had happened is, once Mrs. Degsy and her dad had realised what had happened, Mrs. Degsy's dad then wrote a letter to my dad, because they had each other's phone numbers, and faxed my dad to basically say to my dad what an absolute fucking piece of thieving shit I was. And my dad read this fax from Mrs. Degsy's dad down the phone to me. And Mrs. Degsy's dad is a very intelligent fella, and he absolutely fucking took me to pieces. I don't have any copy of it. No copy exists. I remember it, and this is the thing, it was not like there was no fucks or shits or cunts in there. It was like an elegantly constructed, very well argued case for me just being a contemptible piece of shit. And my dad read this down the phone to me. And this, honestly, is where it gets a little bit hazy. I can't remember the exact ordering of events, and I've always said this, you know, when I can remember things clearly, I will say I can remember them clearly. Where I can't, I won't make shit up. But from that phone call, which was one of the worst phone, it's like having your entire self destroyed in real time. And the thing that hurts the most is that it's all fucking true. There was not a single word. Well, as I say that, it's like, on the surface of it, it was all completely true, and in the background was like, not that I could make an excuse, but it's like, and not like I could abrogate responsibility because it was me who did it, but it was like, this is the addict. It's the addict that did that. It's not me. That's not everything who I am. But he, we'd only been going out. Me and Mrs. Degsy had been going out for 3 or 4 months. He didn't know any of that shit. So there was no defence. I couldn't defend myself. My dad was absolutely disgusted because he had met Mrs. Degsy and he'd really liked her and they got on together. So one way or another, I had to spend another night in Chelmsford, feeling utterly and completely bereft, which was exactly what I deserved to feel. Had me sort of tickets already booked to get back up to Manchester. And then at some point, now I will, like I say, I'm going to have to smoosh these things together because I don't know exactly the order that things happened in. But I did talk to Mrs. Degsy, and one way or another, we arranged that we were going to see each other, and her mum and dad were completely against it. They were like, do not go anywhere fucking near this. Not that they would use that language, but essentially it was like, fucking steer clear. Get a million miles away from this fucking piece of shit. Don't go anywhere near him. And Mrs. Degsy kind of like fought my corner. She was like, no, I want to see him. I want to at least talk to him and understand what's gone on here. And the agreement that was reached eventually was because mum and dad were kind of like, no, we kind of prohibit it. It's not going to happen. And she was like, no, well, you know what? I am an adult. I can actually decide what I'm going to do for myself. So I at least want to see him and talk to him about and ask him about this. So the agreement that was reached was, at the time, Mrs. Degsy's uncle lived down in Altrincham, which is at the arse end of the Metrolink. The Metrolink had got down to Altrincham by that point. So the agreement that was reached was that Mrs. Degsy could come over from the Isle of Man and she would go and stay at her uncle's, and this was literally as good as it was going to get, that we would meet on neutral territory. And Mrs. Degsy was kind of sort of striking out from her uncle's. I would go down to Altrincham and that we would meet each other. So I don't remember the conversations. I do remember that I was giving it some bullshit because I was talking about I had county court judgments against me and I had to make a cash payment at a court or something like that. Some absolute fucking bullshit. You know what it's like. Addicts they are world-class liars. They really are. And that was how the meeting was arranged. So from my dad's, I got on the Metrolink. I went all the way down to Altrincham, and me and Mrs. Degsy had arranged, if you come down from the station and come to this bit, I'll meet you there, which was not very far away from her uncle's house. And I do remember this, as I got the Metrolink down there, and I could see her as I was getting to the point where we were supposed to meet. And I think, what the fuck are you doing? What the fuck have you done? You are completely in love with this lass, and you have just royally fucked her over. And she's still taking the time to actually see you. She's still taking the time to actually talk to you. And as I was walking towards her, I was thinking, she's so pretty. She's so pretty. She's so lovely. And you've enjoyed your time together so much. And here you are now. You're fighting for your fucking life. I mean, God, with the benefit of hindsight, arguably we've been together 27 years now, literally fighting for your fucking life. Because you had to gamble. You felt the need. You had to gamble. And as I was walking towards her, and I didn't know what she would do. If she'd have just fucking hit me and punch me or kick me in the fucking bollocks or tried to claw my fucking eyes out, any of that would have been fine, and I would just stood there and took it, because it was nothing less than I deserved. But instead, as I got close to her and looked at her, and we looked each other in the eyes, and she looked at me, and instead of any of those things, what she actually did was ask me a question. And she said, "Why did you hurt me?" And in that moment, something changed. Because here's the thing, as an addict, because you have no sense of self-worth, it kind of strips your sense of self. It kind of strips your sense of identity, because even though you know you are a person, you are reduced in your own head to the status of an addict. And you get to the point where if you don't care about yourself, you find it hard to believe that anyone else would care about you. And there was something about the way that Mrs. Degsy said to me, "Why did you hurt me?" It was a question. It wasn't this fucking full-on rage or fury. You could see it was genuinely like, I thought we were doing well. I thought we were, enjoying each other's company. I thought we had a relationship here. Why did you hurt me? It's like somebody else cares about you enough that they let you in enough for you to be able to hurt them. And with that, we went to a nearby pub. So it's like, okay, we're at least going to talk to each other. We're at least going to have a conversation here. Obviously, I was hugely apologetic. I'm really sorry. It was like, I think I was still on the bullshit line, that it's like I needed money for something else, because I wasn't ready to say, like, actually, I stole your money so that I could fucking play fucking fruit machines. But we were at least at the point where we could talk to each other. So we went to a nearby pub, and she was keeping me at arm's length, as you could imagine. And the bit of my brain that wasn't corrupted, it's a little bit, I don't know, Jekyll and Hyde, call it angel and the devil, black and white, whatever you want. The bit of me that was still kind of an actual functioning person was, can you just look at what you have fucking done here? What is fucking wrong with you? Look at this. Look at what you've done. And you're here with this gorgeous, gorgeous lass who you're completely in love with. And you are fucking on the edge, man. You're going to lose her in the next fucking 10 minutes. She could be gone forever. And I knew that, and I knew that I had done it to myself. And we went to a nearby pub, and we got a drink, and we sat down at the back of the pub. And this is why, incidentally, I've got this machine here, Terminator by JPM. And we're sat in the back of the pub, and I know I'm fighting for my fucking life, and we're talking and we're fighting for my life. And this fucking thing here is in my line of sight behind her. And I'm talking to Mrs. Degsy and trying to reconcile what's happened and explain it or make excuses or whatever. Just give me another fucking chance. And I wanted to play this fucking fruit machine. There was a bit of me, even at that moment, that still wanted to gamble, that still just wanted to put money into a fruit machine. And I just remember thinking, what the fuck is this? What is this utter corrosion that is eating away at me? It is an addiction. Like I say, it doesn't have to be fruit machines. It can be, there are so many things that we can get addicted to, be it drugs or alcohol, other forms of gambling, whatever it may be. It's one of them things. If you have never experienced it, then I am thankful for you. And if you have, I guess you know what it is I'm talking about, because it will turn you inside out, and it will leave you in situations that you would not even have deemed imaginable, and doing things that you could never have possibly considered, as I did here. One way or another, the conversation ended and we weren't actually split up. We were still tentatively together. Mrs. Degsy went back to her uncle's. I got the Metrolink all the way back up to Radcliffe, and that then became what we have. And I've got the dates here, and I will finish this one off in December 94. So what I did is I went back to work and worked any hours that I could. Even though Mrs. Degsy was back on the Isle of Man, I worked all the hours I could. We kept in touch. I was writing her letters. We were speaking to each other on the phone. And her mum and dad softened a little bit towards the end of 1994. I remember her dad actually rang me up at the place I was working at and kind of said, look, we're not sure about this. We're not sure about you at all, but we're going to invite you over to come and stay with us for Christmas. You know, we're aware that you and Mrs. Degsy are still together, so you can come over if you want and stay for Christmas. And I said, yeah, thank you very much. That would be lovely. I really appreciate it. And so that's what happened. So at December 94, I went over to the Isle of Man, and it was incredible. I remember just how amazing it was to see Mrs. Degsy again. Her parents were standoffish with me, as you would imagine. It was uncomfortable, as it should have been for me, considering what I'd done. But they were kind of like tentatively, all right, we'll give you another chance. And here's the thing, and they are Christians. They go to church every Sunday. And I know religion gets a bad rap these days, but there is something in there about forgiveness and, you know, absolving of sin and that kind of thing. And one of the things that they asked me to do was that there was a New Year's service. So we're going to December 31st, 1994, going into the 1st of January, 1995. There was a midnight service at a local church where they go all the time, still indeed do go to this day. And it was like, okay, there's a midnight service. It would be nice if you could come. So me and Mrs. Degsy went to this service that started at 11 o'clock or whatever. The idea being to see midnight over into the new year. And so it was, as the clock ticked over into 1995. I prayed to a God that I didn't believe in, for a salvation that I didn't believe I deserved, and for a redemption that I didn't believe I was capable of, but was very, very grateful in that moment to at least have been given a chance. And from that time forward, I will not pretend it was all plain sailing. I will not pretend it was easy. But I think something did flip inside me when Mrs. Degsy asked me that question. Rather than just lashing out in retaliation, she sought to understand and rationalise what had happened and asked me that question. Why did you hurt me? And that got me thinking. And in the years that followed, we were able to slowly build something together that has now turned into a relationship. 27 years later, we're still together. We've been married since 1998. And it was not that long ago. I'm literally talking in the last sort of year or so, certainly with the whole, when COVID tipped the world upside down, and there were many things that we were talking about. And one of the questions that I asked her is, why did you put up with me? Because I was such a shit. And I don't understand why you didn't just dump me and walk away. And she kind of said to me, look, we both hurt each other. You know, neither of our hands are clean on this. But as much as anything, I saw that you were hurting as well. You know, I was hurting at the time, and you were like the only person who would give me the time of day that you could. It was not diagnosed at the time, but you kind of saw through my depression and saw me. And I saw through your addiction and saw you. And that was worth sticking with. And in the same way that you stuck with me, I stuck with you because I want the person inside. You are not addiction. You are you. And I've always thought that right from those early days when she would ring me up at 3 a.m. It's like, I didn't know, I didn't have a name for it then, but it was like, I love this person. There's something else going on. I don't know what it is, but I love the person. And I think in both of our cases, we saw through the problem to see the person. And here we still are, 27 years later. Oh, fucking hell, that's a fucking chop suey of a mess. I'm looking at the number of Bandicam clips I've got going here. I'll fucking get this thing together. I'll get it into some kind of shape. Not to try and change any of the facts of the case, but get something that's actually fucking... it works as a cohesive sort of narrative. This was not a good one to do. I was not looking forward to this one. Like I say, Gambling Low Ebbs Part 4, if I'm completely honest, was kind of a stalling tactic. I knew I needed to get to this one. I think that's it. I think that is Gambling Low Ebbs Part 5. It's the worst one for me. I know it's not dramatic. I know it's not, there's no fucking knives in heads or fucking starvation or fucking smashing cars up with fucking rocks. But for me, it epitomizes the utter lows, the fucking depths to which you can sink when an addiction completely has you in its grasp. And I will never forget that moment when I put Mrs. Degsy's cash card into that cash point in Chelmsford, put in her PIN and stole her money so I could play fucking fruit machines. And I am eternally grateful to her for being able to think beyond that and actually ask me a question instead of condemn me out of hand, which she would have been well within her rights to do. And that is one of her many, many gifts to me, for which I am eternally grateful. So, thank you very much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed this video. I will catch up with you next time. Now it is goodbye.